While the world's attention is often fixed on the battlefields of eastern Ukraine, a new diplomatic front has opened thousands of kilometers away, in the heart of Africa. Why is Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's embattled president, suddenly visiting Africa now? What does he hope to achieve? And how will this move reverberate across a continent where allegiances are anything but simple? As Zelensky's historic trip to South Africa unfolds, the stakes for Ukraine, Russia, and African nations themselves have never been higher. What do you think? Can Africa truly tip the scales in the Ukraine-Russia conflict? Or is this just another chapter in global power politics? Share your thoughts as we explore the full story. Zelensky's arrival in South Africa is no ordinary diplomatic gesture. It's the first official visit by a Ukrainian head of state to the continent, a move that signals both urgency and ambition. For years, Ukraine's foreign policy largely overlooked Africa, focusing instead on its European and North American partners. That changed dramatically after Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, when Kiev realized that global support, especially from the global south, could be decisive not just on the battlefield, but in the court of world opinion. The numbers tell the story. Since 2022, Ukraine has doubled its African embassies from 10 to 20, ramping up diplomatic engagement in a region where Russia, China, Turkey, and the UAE are all vying for influence. Before we continue, welcome to Pan-African Lens. If you're passionate about Africa's diverse cultures, rich history, development, and the contemporary issues shaping the continent and its diaspora, you've come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe and join the conversation as we explore these powerful stories together. Let's continue. But why now? The timing is no coincidence. Ukraine's relationship with its main military backer, the United States, has soured since Donald Trump returned to the White House in January. Trump has paused military aid, branded Zelensky a dictator, and blamed Ukraine for prolonging the war. With Washington's support in jeopardy, Kiev is urgently seeking new partners and legitimacy on the world stage. Africa, with its 54 votes at the United Nations and a tradition of non-alignment, is a diplomatic prize both Moscow and Kiev are desperate to win. Zelensky's visit comes at a moment of shifting allegiances. In the early days of the war, 28 African countries voted to condemn Russia's invasion at the UN. But as the conflict dragged on, Moscow doubled down on its outreach, offering military cooperation, economic deals, and a steady stream of anti-Western disinformation. Today, only 13 African countries reliably back Ukraine in UN votes, with many more abstaining or siding with Russia. Russia's military footprint, especially through its Wagner mercenaries, now rebranded as the Africa Corps, has grown in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and the Central African Republic. The result: Africa is now a key battleground for global influence, and Ukraine can no longer afford to ignore it. But Zelensky's African push has not been without controversy. In 2024, Ukraine was accused by Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso of supporting jihadist attacks against Malian soldiers and Russian mercenaries in the Sahel. A spokesperson for Ukrainian military intelligence made comments interpreted as admitting Kiev's role in providing intelligence to Tuareg separatist rebels, leading to Mali and Niger cutting diplomatic ties with Ukraine. Ukraine has denied supplying arms or drones to the rebels, dismissing the accusations as Russian propaganda. Yet the diplomatic fallout has been real, with some African governments now openly calling for UN action against Ukraine for supporting terrorism in Africa. These tensions highlight the delicate balancing act facing African nations. Many, like South Africa, have tried to maintain a neutral stance, refusing to condemn Russia, but also seeking dialogue with Ukraine. South Africa, in particular, has deep historical ties to Russia dating back to Soviet support for the anti-apartheid struggle, and is a key member of the BRICS bloc alongside Russia and China. Pretoria has even conducted joint military exercises with Moscow, drawing criticism from Western capitals. Yet South Africa also sees itself as a potential mediator, having led an African peace initiative to Kiev and Moscow in 2023. President Cyril Ramaphosa's government insists that its goal is to add to the efforts to build peace, not to take sides. So how does South Africa balance its good relations with Russia with the optics of hosting Zelensky? The answer lies in Pretoria's careful diplomacy. Ahead of Zelensky's visit, Ramaphosa spoke with Vladimir Putin to reaffirm their strong bilateral relations and commitment to a peaceful resolution of the conflict. At the same time, Ramaphosa has welcomed Zelensky to Pretoria's union buildings for closed-door talks, a joint media briefing, and discussions on expanding cooperation in trade, agriculture, and education. For South Africa, the visit is an opportunity to showcase its role as a bridge builder and to boost its own credentials as a global peacemaker at a time when relations with the U.S. have also soured. What do you think? Can South Africa truly remain neutral, or will it eventually have to choose between Moscow and Kiev? Is Pretoria's balancing act sustainable, or is it just delaying an inevitable reckoning? Let us know in the comments. For Ukraine, the stakes are clear. With Western support uncertain, Kiev needs every bit of international legitimacy it can get. African nations, with their growing economic clout and strategic resources, are vital partners, not just for diplomatic support, but for trade, technology, and post-war reconstruction. Ukraine's Grains from Ukraine humanitarian program, which has delivered food aid to millions in Africa, is one example of how Kiev is trying to build goodwill and counter Russia's efforts to disrupt Ukrainian grain exports to the continent. But as analysts point out, Ukraine's outreach is still playing catch-up. Russia operates around 40 embassies in Africa, maintains a wide network of mercenaries and political operatives, and has been investing in the region for over a decade. The economic dimension is just as important. Both Russia and Ukraine are major exporters of cereals to Africa, and the war has sent food and fertilizer prices soaring, hitting African economies hard. Many African leaders are less interested in the ideological battle between East and West than in securing affordable food, investment, and technology for their people. As Professor Sefa Mandla Zondi of the University of Johannesburg notes, Africa needs both. It cannot be expected to choose sides. For South Africa, even modest increases in trade with Ukraine are valuable, given the country's economic woes and high unemployment. But can Ukraine's diplomatic push overcome the legacy of recent controversies? The allegations of supporting rebel attacks in Mali have damaged Kiev's image in parts of West Africa. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, condemned Ukraine's external interference, and several Sahelian juntas have now openly sided with Russia. These developments underscore the risks of being drawn into Africa's own complex conflicts, where foreign involvement is often viewed with suspicion. At the same time, African countries have shown they are willing to play a more active role in global diplomacy. The African Peace Initiative led by Ramaphosa in 2023, which brought 7 heads of state to both Kiev and Moscow, was a historic first. Although the mission did not yield an immediate breakthrough, it demonstrated Africa's potential as a mediator and its desire to be taken seriously as a global player. Since then, South Africa has joined Ukrainian-led peace talks and continues to engage both sides, even as it resists Western pressure to impose sanctions on Russia. How do you see Africa's role in the Ukraine conflict evolving? Should African countries push harder for peace or focus on their own interests? Can they act as honest brokers, or will they inevitably be pulled into the orbit of one side or the other? Share your perspective below. Meanwhile, Russia is watching Zelensky's African overtures with concern. Moscow has invested heavily in building influence across the continent, offering military support, arms deals, and anti-Western messaging through state media outlets like Sputnik. The Kremlin's reaction to Zelensky's visit has been muted, but unmistakably displeased. Russian President Vladimir Putin recently spoke with Ramaphosa to reiterate Russia's principled stance on the conflict and the need to address Moscow's security concerns. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has also criticized African participation in Ukrainian peace initiatives, warning against what he sees as Western manipulation of the continent's diplomacy. For Zelensky, the visit is both a diplomatic gamble and a necessity. He's seeking to rally support for Ukraine's position, secure new partnerships, and show that Kiev is not isolated on the world stage, even as Russian missiles strike his own capital. The trip has already been cut short by a deadly Russian attack on Kiev, underlining the ever-present risks of war. Yet even a brief visit is a symbolic breakthrough, marking a new chapter in Ukraine-Africa relations that would have been unthinkable just 2 years ago. Looking ahead, the road to peace remains long and uncertain. African mediation efforts have yet to produce concrete results, and both Russia and Ukraine show little sign of backing down from their core demands. The U.S., under President Trump, is pushing for a deal that would freeze territorial lines and potentially force Ukraine to make painful concessions, an outcome Kiev has so far refused to accept. But with global alliances shifting and new diplomatic players emerging, the possibility of an African-brokered breakthrough cannot be ruled out. In the end, Zelensky's visit to Africa is about more than just countering Russia or seeking new trade deals. It's a recognition that the world is changing, and that Africa, with its growing population, resources, and diplomatic weight, is now a central player in global affairs. For Ukraine, building genuine partnerships in Africa could be the key to weathering the storm of war and rebuilding in its aftermath. For African nations, the challenge is to leverage their newfound influence to secure real benefits for their people without being caught in the crossfire of great power rivalries. So, what's your verdict? Is Zelensky's African outreach a turning point, or just another diplomatic sideshow? Can Africa chart its own course, or will it be forced to choose between Russia and the West? And most importantly, what should African leaders prioritize as they navigate these turbulent waters? Join the conversation below, because as this story shows, Africa's voice matters now more than ever. Thank you for watching Pan-African Lens. If you enjoyed this video and want to continue celebrating Africa's heritage and discussing its future, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps grow our community and keeps the conversation alive. See you in the next video.